Good afternoon, good evening, students. We are doing a video recording today for our wellness unit, and we have LSTC's own Brooke Peterson with us. She has come twice to this class to help us talk about wellness. That's when we could do retreats, and we did them in person, and we enjoyed that very much. It always led into us taking the wellness inventory, which we're also going to be doing during this module. So thank you, Brooke, for being with us today on this recording. And the topic is kind of a hard one because it's the reality that in our society, a lot of people are dealing with stress and burnout, anxiety, and depression. We know that pastors and seminaries still are not immune to that. We all have our own issues as well. And we're going to just hope that you can shed a little bit of light on that, both as we understand other people and ourselves. So maybe as a way into it, like what's going on today that everybody just seems to be like so stressed out?
Yeah.
And
Well, it's an interesting time in history right now, as you know, we're recording because it's the middle of COVID. And so we're all kind of experiencing the world in a new way in the midst of this pandemic. And what's really fascinating, I think, for therapists and for the way that when I wear that hat, the way that we're working with clients is there are some people right now, and for students that are watching this, they may be the people that they love, who in the midst of this pandemic are experiencing really serious increase in stress, increase in anxiety, increase in depression. Um, and that's quite real. There's a lot of people that are seeking out mental health services because of how hard this pandemic has been on them. And at the same time, it's also really fascinating that for a number of folks, especially people who deal with a lot of anxiety, there have been, for many therapists, we've worked with clients who are like, man, I am doing way better in this pandemic. Like, I don't feel as bad. I'm so much less stressed. This is wonderful. Um, Maybe wonderful is a little bit too far, but close, something close to that. And some of that is because, especially for people that deal with a lot of anxiety and a lot of stressors, many of those have lessened. And so it's the small things like having to commute to work, having to, show up presenting themselves in a certain way in their job, having to respond to coworkers when those relationships are really stressful. So there is, both at the same time that we're dealing with issues like job loss and people getting sick and all of that stress, there's also people who have really noticed an alleviation of their symptoms. Additionally, and I'll just say one more thing, but for many folks, there's this sense that like their anxiety would always tell them everything's going to get so bad. And that's what really kind of kept that anxiety up all the time. And suddenly we're like in that time of things being so bad. And so for some people, it's like their worst case scenario has happened and actually they're realizing there's some freedom in that. So people are stressed because of the pandemic. People are stressed by having to figure out new things. And there's also people who are finding that there's a rhythm to this pandemic that's actually helpful to them. And I'm guessing people in your class probably fall in both of those categories.
well, it must be interesting to you as a therapist to kind of hear people's stories. And I agree, my nephew, uh, he already had some concerns about thinking the worst could happen and concern with OCD and germs a little bit. And then a pandemic happens, and then there's climate change, and then there's the politics and everything. So it seems to me, though, as I recall some of your wisdom, that you have a way to maybe help us keep some of this in perspective.
Yeah. So part of what I've talked about in previous classes, and so what I want to talk a little bit about today, is something called the wellness continuum. And this is also connected to that wellness assessment that you're going to take in the class or that students are going to take in this class. Um, and so especially now, as we're in the midst of a pandemic, I think people are becoming more and more aware that we really live in what we might think of as an illness care system. So what happens is you go to the doctor when you feel sick. Of course, we always have these, you should go every year for a physical and we should make sure you're doing wellness assessments. But for the majority of people, they have to really have a complaint in order to access any kind of services. Um, and so, as a mental health care provider or as a therapist, I often do this work of caring for people who feel sick, who feel scared, who feel like they can't function in the ways that they want to, as it relates to relationships, to work, to finding meaning in life. And so, if you can pull up the wellness assessment, maybe or I'm sorry, not the wellness assessment, the wellness continuum. Great, this is so helpful. So this is a really simple diagram as a way to think about how we might consider what wellness is. So when we live in a medical model, as you'll see here on the one side, there's crisis and then there's a neutral point. And so I think if, people are listening to this recording right now, if we were all in a class together, I would say, like, what are some signs that someone's in a crisis? Like, how would you know that we're in a crisis, or even that we're kind of along that continuum of a crisis? And that's when people start to have symptoms. Maybe they can't get out of bed. Maybe they feel like they're crying all the time. Maybe they feel like they can't find joy in the world, or they're scared a lot of the time. For anyone who's taken my mental health or mental illness and pastoral care class, they'll know that on average, people who are suffering from depression or anxiety will wait 10 years. They'll suffer for 10 years before they go and try to get some help. And so in a medical model, what we're really always trying to do is move from crisis, from having symptoms, from being sick in some way, back to neutral. And the reason we're doing that is because that's what your insurance is going to pay for. So insurance doesn't pay for you to grow in your vision of yourself. Basically, what they want to say is everyone's kind of living this neutral life. When things get really bad, we want to get you back to neutral. Neutral, I think, is also an important thing for us to think about, because neutral is often when symptoms disappear. So for instance, if we're talking a lot about depression and anxiety because those are kind of the most common and probably what people will see a lot in their ministry settings. But neutral isn't really what it means to be well as a person of faith, right? God doesn't say, like, I come to give you life neutrally. It's like, I come to give you life in abundance. And so I think it's really helpful as a pastor to think about, okay, the medical model is on this side of this continuum. But for people of faith, we actually want something that's on the other side of this continuum, that isn't just a neutral, everyday life, but is really a transformed life, one in which you're able to find meaning, you're able to find joy. And knowing that this is a continuum also, I think it can be helpful for people to understand that we move in and out, we move along this continuum all the time in our lives. And so, if you have a grief event, if you have something serious happen to you, you'll probably move more toward crisis. But if you have communities that care for you, if you're able to access the services that you need, hopefully you're able to kind of move beyond just neutral and into wellness. Also, even just using that word wellness, I want to have students think about that in a bigger way than just like what you might see around like buying a product, like a wellness product, or drinking some kind of special tea or buying a special outfit, but rather that it is something bigger than that. And that's the kind of work we have to do in imagining what life can look like. One example that I think can be really helpful is from that Netflix show that Marie Kondo put together. And as I was watching that back when it came out a couple of years ago, she comes in and helps everyone like organize their house in a certain way. And there would be times they'd be in like the big reveal, and I would look at that and think like, well, that still looks messy. Like, that doesn't look clean to me. And that's, I think, the way we want to think about wellness too, is like, it isn't for me to say, Craig, this is what wellness would look like for you. This is how you'll know that you're there. I might have some guideposts that I could suggest or some ways of imagining maybe things for you, but you are also the person who says like, okay, here I am, I'm on this side of the continuum now, I'm feeling things in a different way. And so wellness is really about checking in with yourself, about living a life that is connected to yourself, to God, and to other people. Being able to, even as Freud would say, to like live and love and work. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're trying to go.
So, um, the neutral point, that's interesting to me because that would imply that, that's to be human, that there are going to be good days and bad days, good hours and bad hours. And do you think sometimes we have a harder time accepting that that's just part of being human? Is that we're not always going to be happy?
Yeah, of course. I think that has sort of become quite the contrast in a pandemic, at least for me, is that all of a sudden I'm really in my feelings a lot because I'm home all the time. And um, so I do think there is some difficulty in kind of feeling the ups and downs of life. I've certainly had clients in the past that would come in and um, it's such a struggle to feel sadness. It's such a struggle to feel anger. They've been told their whole lives that those are bad feelings, that we have to run from those feelings, that we need to be happy, that it's almost like they don't quite have access to that. And so, one question I'll often ask people as we're kind of talking about the feelings that they're having in their life is like, what feelings do you think are really hard for you to experience? Like, which ones do you feel like maybe you don't even know about? And for a lot of people, it is those things that we might think of as a bit more negative, like sadness or grief or um, anger. But, you know, life is constantly moving. And when we can really get in touch with that, I think it helps us to be able to sort of see that every feeling we have is not the only feeling we'll have. But then also to experience this like really robust buffet of emotions that we are created to experience.
It reminds me of the Rumi poem about the guest house and welcoming all the emotions that it means to be
Oh
human.
my gosh.
I have to say, as an Enneagram 4, and Enneagram's coming up next week,
Ooh.
hard for me to welcome all of my feelings sometimes. But I feel like the kind of the host of a news show that says, well, we only have a couple more minutes or we only have
Uh-huh.
seconds. So, Brooke, seminary can be stressful for people.
Mhm.
And obviously we all have different temperaments and different needs. So it's hard to do a plan that fits for everybody. But if
Yeah.
you were to just say give us a couple pearls of wisdom for surviving the various stresses of seminary, what would you tell us?
Oh my gosh, what would I say? Well, I think maybe one thing I would point back to is what you're already doing in this class around taking that wellness assessment. Because the class may not know, or maybe you'll introduce this to them, that you and I both went to this training with Living Compass, which is a wellness initiative started by the Episcopal Church. And one thing I think is really helpful about the wellness assessment is it sort of tries to look at your life in all of these different areas. So spirituality, rest and play, resilience, caring for your body, organization, relation, it goes on and on. And really, I think seminary is an opportunity for you to look at your life in the way that the wellness assessment presents it, like a garden, and sort of say, like, what are the places where I haven't really been tending to that? I haven't really been watering that, not with judgment, not to say, like, and, you're a terrible person and you'll be a really bad pastor, but actually to just say, like, okay, I have this opportunity now to look at my life in this particular way. And it may not cover everything. But what are things I want to attend to, and to use seminary as a time to say, like, I'm in a community of people that care about me. I'm in a community of people that are seeking abundant life, that are seeking a way to find meaning. And so to use that community to help you.
So, our time is up, but one thing I must say, full disclosure, we recorded this earlier, and we've already talked about the Enneagram in class, and you You already know what a four is and how they deal with feelings. And secondly, I wish I could take a full course with Brooke, but the whole great thing, student, is you can. So
Woo!
available. And with that, thank you, Brooke,
Of
and
course, my pleasure.
we hope to hear more from you.
Thanks. Bye bye.